Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second installment of Inside the NFL Front Office, an exclusive show that gives the fans an inside look of how and what decisions are made for the NFL scouting and personnel departments. And I'm Tom Moore from BikeFans.com, and joining me as always is our resident draft and free agency expert, Geoff Nichols. Geoff, welcome back. I guess the fans didn't beat you up too much on our first show for your insights.
No, I was going to say, after hearing you say episode number 2, couldn't have been too bad. I feel accomplished to be back.
Yeah, they're Viking fans. They're not shy, so eventually they're going to get after you. So that'll be fun, too.
Oh, yeah, I better start investing in some better locks on my doors and everything. Don't want anyone beating the door down around draft time.
Absolutely. Well, everybody's an expert this time of year. You know this. And, with the draft just over 2 weeks away, we're definitely going to focus a good portion of this show on the Minnesota Vikings and whom they may target to fill some of the needs they've got. But before we do, I wanted to get your insight on a couple of ongoing free agency topics that are on NFL fans' minds. Are you ready to get at it?
Absolutely. Hit me with your best shot.
I will. Well, I'm going to start you, pretty close to home here, Geoff, and ask you about running back Adrian Peterson. Obviously not a Viking anymore, but people are still interested. He made trips to New England last week and New Orleans yesterday. Not hearing a whole lot, but what's the buzz you're hearing about those two visits?
Yeah, no, good question. Around when the free agency market opened up, everyone was really focused on where would Adrian Peterson land. And I think the process has been a little more drawn out than some believed it would be. But about a week and a half ago, he traveled to New England, and they put him through a full workout. So I know some media people said, well, maybe they were just doing an agent favor, but the Patriots don't put players through workouts if it's just a favor, kind of get to know you type visit. He left without a contract, so I think the doors remain open there, but I think it's something that probably wouldn't be settled until after the draft. Last night, he traveled into New Orleans, had dinner with the Saints, I believe, and then met with some pro personnel individuals this afternoon. All that I've heard is that the Saints remain interested. They want another running back to complement Mark Ingram. Peterson obviously has expanded the net of teams he's interested in since he had put out his initial list. But I think it really comes down to money and role. I think Peterson's camp's best play may be to wait until after the draft, see who doesn't end up with a running back, and maybe the desperation gets the team to pay a bit more or to give Peterson a bit of a bigger role on a team. Either way, he should find a home here shortly in the next 2-3 weeks.
What's your guess on him? Fans always speculate, hey, he's trying to miss mini camps and OTAs. He doesn't do that. The guy's in immaculate shape. Don't know if that's the case necessarily. But what's the bigger thing you think in his mind? Is it money or is it role?
To be honest, I think it's a little bit of both. As an NFL player, you can't blame someone for trying to get the best payday. Right now their body and their skill is the main investment they have in their life. So being able to really, bring in the money is what it comes down to. But at the same point in Peterson's career, he's earned enough money to live very well off of, and even his children as well. But the guy wants to win a Super Bowl. Everyone wants that. So it really comes down to, is he okay being the backup on a Super Bowl caliber team, or would he prefer to kind of be that main or maybe a 1B type back who's going to be able to make an impact? So when they do win a Super Bowl, if they make it that far, everyone says Peterson was a part of it.
Yeah, well, let me ask you, before we settle on the Twin Cities and spend the whole evening talking about that, let's go out to San Francisco, and I want to get your take on a guy who seemed to set the world on fire a few years ago for the 49ers, but he can't seem to get a sniff from an NFL team, and that's quarterback Colin Kaepernick. What's the baggage that makes teams so cold on what seems to be a physically talented player?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. I think him participating and taking a knee and kind of starting that entire movement at the beginning of last season really probably cools a few teams off. I don't think that's the end all of why teams haven't had as much interest in him. Coming out of San Francisco, he did put up decent stats last year. So from his camp standpoint, he wants to be in a situation where he's going to be able to compete for playing time. And I don't know if that opportunity is out there, because if you look at the teams who are QB needy, the Bears went out and got Glennon. The Browns are obviously going to draft a quarterback this year. The Jets, they're kind of doing their own thing, to be completely honest. I think they'll look at quarterbacks this year, but I don't think they're really committed to bringing someone in from the unrestricted free agent market either. So I mean, I think he's another kind of candidate who, after the draft, is going to have some options. But to be completely blunt, if he's going to come in and compete for a spot or be a backup quarterback, teams just won't put up with distractions from backup quarterbacks. It's as simple as that. I mean, there's plenty of backup quarterbacks in the league. Why should you spend money on someone who's going to potentially make a scene? I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Well, as we get away from the Bay side, let's turn our attention to the draft, and I want to start with a wide receiver spot. And last week we talked about Laquan Treadwell, but I want to ask you more about the process that happened last year. And all the rumors that fans heard was, indicated the Vikings were high on Corey Coleman out of Baylor or Josh Doxson from TCU, but few mentioned Minnesota as a destination for Treadwell. From what you did here last year, or even since then, it all had been on the board when the Vikings picked all three of those receivers. Was Treadwell really the pick of the Vikings, his best choice?
From what I've heard, no, he was not the first choice of the Vikings. From what I know, he was in the same tier of choices as their number one target. So it's not like the Vikings were taking, a lesser player in their mind. It just maybe wasn't the player they preferred if all the wide receivers were available. So, I mean, I think the reason that I and many other experts or draft nicks kind of pegged Treadwell as a Viking is because he fit Norv Turner's offense so well. As a split end receiver, someone you could just isolate on one side of the field. He's a good blocker, so he can block up that one side of the field by himself, but he also can work inside well. It's just a matter of learning how to get separation at the NFL level.
Yeah, and that's why I'm asking you, really on Treadwell. It's really about process, what an NFL GM goes through. So now these two receivers that might have been rated higher by the Vikings over Treadwell are gone. Is it that point in time that the team says, hey, I'm going away from my board who's naturally 1 through 32 in the first round because I need a receiver? Or how does a GM actually think when that moment comes in the draft?
Well, teams go through a lot of analysis before the draft and do their own internal mocks to get ahead of these type of scenarios to know how the board possibly could fall. But when it comes down to the Viking-specific situation last year, I think first, and you always have to look at the board holistically. You need to say, okay, well, here's a wide receiver that I rate highly in our top tier of receivers. But let's see, before our next pick, is there going to be a run on a specific position I'm trying to target in the draft as well? So say that's quarterback. Am I better off taking the top cornerback on my board now before the run and taking a wide receiver in that second tier pool? Or am I best off taking this wide receiver now and seeing what's left on the board when the next pick comes around? I mean, it's a delicate balance, but most of the times, I mean, if the teams can break it down to 2-3 positions, the top player on your board is going to be within those 3 position groups, and you're going to be able to say you took the best player available.
Yeah, on a positive, at least they didn't go with punter or kicker, right? They didn't panic.
Hey, I mean, the Raiders did it once, and I can't say Janikowski was so bad, so...
Yeah, true.
But yes.
Absolutely. Well, as we look specifically on this Viking team, some of the biggest need areas for this 2017 team are on the offensive side of the ball. And with Latavius Murray potentially being on a 1-year prove-it contract, Geoff, do the Vikings consider taking a high-caliber running back in round 1, like LSU's big back Leonard Fournette, or a smallish Stanford speedster like Christian McCaffrey, or maybe even a Kareem Hunt from Toledo? Or do they wait for that hit-em gin in the later rounds?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on what value falls down the board. I think Leonard Fournette's obviously out after the Vikings traded away their pick for Bradford. And I mean, I would like to say Christian McCaffrey's probably out as well, since I think he'll go higher than a lot of people think, just because versatility is gold in the NFL. But I mean, depending on what's available when their pick in the second round comes around, I think the Vikings are they filled their needs well enough in free agency that if someone they really like there in the second round, they could pull the trigger on that. But it being a deep running back class, I mean, you definitely wouldn't have to pull the trigger early. You could wait around, just depending on what comes available and where you think the value in the draft really lies.
Is there any specific running back when you get in rounds 2, 3, 4 that jump out, you say, that's a real fit for this offense? Because obviously you got the shifty type in Jerick McKinnon, Latavius Murray, more of a between the tackles runner. What would they be looking for? What would be the guy that Viking fans say, yeah, that guy would be a fit if we picked him?
Although he's a polarizing player in the draft, I do think Joe Mixon is the type of running back that the Vikings really could build an offense around. I mean, he's good running the ball. He's explosive and has the burst to beat the defenders to the hole and get down the field. But he also provides that passing impact as well. I mean, not only in the flats, but he also can work down the field as well. So if you want to look at someone who can, kind of do it all, he may be someone in the second round if the Wilfs can get on board with his character issues, or his past character issues, I should say. I mean, the value would be there. I mean, he's a top 15 talent in the draft. But otherwise, if you look more towards rounds 3 and 4, I'm a fan of Kareem Hunt. I mean, some people say he's not explosive enough, but he's the type of player that there's not really many things he does poorly. And something can be said for that, kind of being an all-around back. I mean, he finds the hole and he follows his blockers well. He can make some plays in the passing game. And, he works well out of the shotgun as well, which is something we'll see with Shermer kind of taking over the offense this year. If you move on from him, I think Wayne Gallman out of Clemson is a gritty runner who finishes his runs well, who kind of falls into the same ballpark. He's not super explosive, but he does his job well. But someone else I enjoy is Samaje Perine out of Oklahoma as well. I mean, he's your typical power runner, but he plays with tremendous pad level and has very good balance for someone his size. I mean, tacklers, he's not going to be so elusive, but tacklers really fall off him due to his good balance.
And, you talk about a couple of them, Mixon because of the character issues we all know about, Hunt from the standpoint of, kind of an all-around, everyday Joe back. Do these guys slip into the second and third round? So, for example, Hunt, a lot of people think he's going to go in the first round. Do you think he'll slip to the second? Do you think Mixon slips to the third?
Mixon, I mean, he's a complete wild card. I mean, we've seen it before where teams are interested in a specific prospect and say, well, we'll take him in, early. And then next thing you know, the guy's an undrafted free agent. So, I mean, it's really hard to pin where he is. I think he'll go somewhere in the second round. I mean, I could see him going as early as the Bengals in the second round. I mean, they've been a team who's taken some players with past character concerns and has turned them into tremendous players. But I could also see him slipping into the third as well. I mean, it's kind of one of those things where teams can kind of talk the talk, but until you actually put the card in and kind of take the risk per se, I mean, it's easier to say than do. Hunt's someone I'll probably see going more in the mid to late third round. I mean, teams are high on him, but at the same time, he isn't someone who has an elite skill that makes you really want to covet him or want to grab him out of the bigger pile of players. So he'll find a home early in the draft, probably on the second day, but he's not someone teams are going to be, looking to jockey up the board for into the second round or anything like that.
I'll tell you, though, if you're a Viking fan, from what you're saying, it sounds like because of the depth in this draft, they shouldn't worry. If they see running backs come off the list, we're bound to get somebody, if in fact we go running back, who can contribute.
Definitely. And I mean, something we've seen in past years too is the deeper position groups within the draft. I mean, talent will be pushed down the board because other teams will think, well, I better take a player at a more scarce position and let a running me rather than going to seek out the running backs.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, we learned last year watching this Viking team that no running back's going to make it very far in the NFL without some blocking. And obviously, there was a major issue with the inexperience and the outman version of the line we had last year. The Vikings have 2 free agent tackles in place. We talked about them last week. So I'd assume they'd probably look for a guard early on. From what you've seen for this Pat Shurmur offense, what he likes to run, what are the couple of guards that folks should look for that best fit this style? And if we in fact go that route, can you plug in a rookie guard and have him be effective in year one?
You know what? If you're going to plug and play a rookie offensive lineman, guard's the best position to do it at. Offensive tackle, as we've seen in the past, it's hard to come in and be able to kind of grasp all the concepts you need to at the NFL level. Because not only do you have to worry about power and being bull rush, you also need to worry about elite speed off the ends. I mean, NFL edge rushers are on a completely different level than those you see in the NCAA. At guard, you really just need to worry about what's in front of you and when you need to pull. So, I mean, there's some concepts in a zone blocking scheme that are harder to pick up, but as long as you find a player that has, familiarity in a zone blocking scheme in college, you can basically plug and play them. So if you look at who the Vikings could possibly be looking at, I mean, I think Dan Feeney is someone who definitely fits the bill as a plug and play right guard. He's powerful in the run game, but he also holds up well in pass protection. He definitely will go in the second round, if not before the Vikings pick. But he's definitely someone who would kind of fit the bill of a Viking right guard. Another player that I know myself and other kind of draftniks have picked on is Dion Dawkins. He was an offensive tackle at Temple, but the nice thing is he comes out of a three-point stance, so he understands putting his hand in the ground and getting off the snap well. But I mean, he's very powerful. I mean, some project him to right tackle, but I personally would say if you could plug him in at right guard, he's someone you could really build around moving forward.
If we can get the line figured out, and when we either Joe Berger or Nick Easton sits in the center, or somebody else that's not seen yet in time, we still have a little bit of issue on the blocking with the sudden departure of Rhett Ellison in free agency, and all of a sudden the Vikings are thin at the tight end position now. Now, obviously, Kyle Rudolph had a good season last year, but even though he's a clear starter, he's had a lot of injuries. They haven't been his friend. He was healthy in 2016, and David Morgan's really the only other depth we've got. And he's a very effective blocker, but still pretty raw. So with that in mind, would you look for the Vikings to seek a tight end in this draft? And if so, who would you think they'd go after, a pass receiving tight end or more of an H-back type?
No, I think that's really a question that's kind of outstanding as we move through the draft process. I mean, the departure of Rhett Ellison was tough from a blocking standpoint, but you have to look at it. Coming off of his injury last year, the team didn't really know what they were going to get out of him. So effectively they drafted David Morgan as insurance last year. So he really should be able to move into that H-back pass blocking tight end role this year. As you look at tight ends is also a very deep position in this year's draft class. So you're going to be able to get value in the mid to late rounds. With that said, I mean, it really depends on what ends up being on the board for the Vikings. I mean, ideally, you'd like to find a tight end who can play within the formation. So that means they can both block and go and be an effective pass catcher as well, because then you can really start moving Kyle Rudolph around the field. I mean, you can isolate him on the outside against a slot cornerback or a linebacker, which is clearly a mismatch, not from a speed standpoint, from a size standpoint. If you look at what Norv Turner did early last season, when they were able to isolate Rudolph on the outside, he was much more effective in the red zone just because he didn't have to worry about his blocking duties. He could just get off the line of scrimmage. If you want to look at specific players that would possibly fit that bill, I mean, Jake Butt out of Michigan is a pro-style tight end who plays within the formation. He can kind of do a little bit of everything. His draft stock is variable just due to his torn ACL. I mean, I could easily see him going at the end of the second still. He's a very talented player. But if he lasts until, maybe the second, third round pick that the Vikings have, maybe they're willing to pull the trigger that early. Personally, maybe that's still a little rich for my blood. But someone like George Kittle in the fourth or the fifth rounds, likely fourth at this point, if not even early fourth round, out of Iowa. He's a very good blocker. I mean, he's a willing blocker, which is half the battle. But he has the size and the power to clear out both offensive linemen and linebackers. But he also plays well down the seam and has a good set of hands. So if you have a player who can play down the seam well in the receiving game and have Rudolph on the outside, that would be a huge mismatch for defenses. And I mean, he's a plug-and-play type player.
Yeah, we talk about David Morgan, and you can't avoid the injury bug that has hit Rudolph before. If Rudolph were to go down from what you know about David Morgan, what you saw last year, can he step into that pass receiving role? Is he capable?
He's capable. Obviously, that would not be an ideal situation as well. I mean, I think fans kind of underrate Kyle Rudolph a little bit. I mean, although he's not a huge run after the catch guy, he does do a lot in the middle of the field for the team. But I mean, they really do need to improve their depth at the position because it would be a huge loss if Rudolph went down.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, everyone, knew Ellison was this devastating blocker that we've talked about. And right now, the Vikings fullback for the last three seasons, Zach Line, is on the street as a free agent. Geoff, do the Vikings have any plans for a fullback in this offense? And if so, is Line in the mix to return?
You know what? I don't think they're probably going to carry a fullback on the roster this year. Shermer isn't someone who historically has used the fullback, so there really is no need for one, I guess, if you're running his offense. They'll use a H-back tight end kind of combination player, and that's where David Morgan kind of fits in. But the need for a fullback just really isn't there, so I doubt Zach Line will be back as in the Vikings uniform next year.
Fair enough. Well, as we look at this, the one thing you remember, we chuckle about it a lot, is a couple of years ago when Bridgewater came out, it was Menzel, but all of a sudden in the later rounds you had people like Jimmy Garoppolo, and everybody got, excited about him, and all the draftniks said that's going to be the guy. And he's the one you hear about most often as potentially the Patriots trading him either during the draft or before the draft. What are you thinking? Is the Patriots going to move Garoppolo?
To be honest, I mean, I don't really see the reason for the Patriots to move Garoppolo. I mean, yes, he's a tradable asset, and they can get a pretty decent draft pick out of it. But if you look from a franchise building standpoint, he's proven to be effective for the Patriots when on the field. So there's really no reason for them to trade it. They don't need players to go out to win a Super Bowl. They have their roster intact. They have the talent and the coaching staff they need. I mean, God forbid Tom Brady went down for them. What are we going to do? Put in Jacoby Brissett again? I mean, he won a game for them, but I mean, you're better off just hedging and holding on to Jimmy Garoppolo at this point and seeing kind of where the future brings you. Because if I mean, there's just sure a lot of teams having that extra top 15 pick would be huge, but in the Patriots' shoes, I mean, having Garoppolo may actually be a greater value for them just because of the unknown factor of what they would do at quarterback if Brady were to get hurt.
And that's the point. He's not getting younger. He may be healthy in a great health regimen, but eventually we also succumb to injuries.
Well, exactly. And, you know, it's the fluke things that happen more so. I mean, as much training as you can do, all it takes is a knee or a helmet to the knee, and then you're just out of luck regardless of how much training and how fit you are.
Or a Taylor Heineke putting your foot through a window pane.
Well, yeah, that's also very unpredictable. Would not advise putting your foot through a window, but whatever floats your boat, I guess.
Absolutely. Well, you know, as I close out, I got to do this because it doesn't matter if you're a Viking fan, Cowboy fan, or Patriot fan. There is morbid curiosity. Geoff, what in the world are the Browns going to do at quarterback?
What in the world are the Browns going to do at quarterback? Well, as much as I'd like to be able to tell you that I have a black and white answer for you, I don't think if anyone has known what the Browns are going to do at quarterback for the last decade. So,
including the Browns.
Including the Browns. So I can't say if the Browns have their mind made up per se, but from what I've heard, it sounds like the Browns are pretty much locked in at taking Myles Garrett number 1. And then most say, well, with that 12th pick, they're likely going to take a quarterback. I don't think so. From what it sounds like, the Browns probably will take another, offensive piece, likely a wide receiver, tight end, maybe even a running back if one falls to them, but they truly like. And then they're going to work on taking that top pick in the second round and moving up to their guy. Who that is, they've kind of kept it under wraps. But the name to watch is Patrick Mahomes. He's a guy that a lot of people have kind of seriously underlooked during the draft process. Everyone's, well, Mitch Trubisky is the guy. There's a lot of teams that are high on Mahomes, a lot higher than the media kind of is let on.
Well, you discounted one guy. Don't forget, he was undefeated last year, but Sean Hill is still out there, so you could always end up in Cleveland as well. We've seen stranger things.
We have seen stranger things, but Sean Hill, if you're listening to this, don't go to the Browns. Try to win yourself a Super Bowl.
That sounds good. Well, Geoff, that brings us to the end of this week's edition of Inside the NFL Front Office, but we'll return on April 24th to really look at the defensive side of the ball and maybe the potential moves made by the Vikings. We'll even ask Geoff, hey, Rick Spielman likes to move up in the first round. Will he find the ammunition to do it again this year? And we'll talk about the hot rumors and get your locked-in choice of the Vikings' first pick, whether it be in round 1 or 2. And for our listeners, please post your questions and thoughts in this thread for Geoff's show, and he'll reply and interact with you. And don't forget to follow Geoff on Twitter @VikeFans.com. So until next time, for Geoff Nichols, I'm Tom Moore. So long, everyone.